Hello, hello,
Hello.
hello.
Hi.
Welcome to the Jewish Psychedelic Sandbox. I'm Benny.
I'm Meir.
This is Meir. And we were having a conversation just earlier, and we decided this would be a great opportunity to share with the whole channel what we were talking about and to kind of continue developing some of the ideas that were coming up in this kind of format, which I really appreciate. And so thanks for making the time to sit in the garden.
I love hanging out with you.
Yeah.
So why not share with other people?
Let's share with other people.
See how they like it.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, totally. Okay, so we were discussing Torah as content. We were using the word content. And I think where I was coming from with wanting to use that particular word was that for me, the stories, the structures, the maps of significance that find themselves within the broader scope of Torah are made up of pieces of content in which I can engage with, and often do, and often in specific contexts, like ritual context, community context, learning context. But that the content itself doesn't necessarily contain any particular total truth. It's more that the Torah is a ocean of opportunity for generating new mental and emotional experiences that can participate in the way I construct the narrative of my life.
Right. We often engage with the Torah and things like that as very fixed. Either as a history book or a fixed set of guidelines, and using the word content makes it more open. It's content that we engage with ourselves.
Right. Yeah, and I really have appreciated when I was able to sort of divest from Torah as a fixed product, but really engaging with it more as an ongoing process, which I think is actually quite present in the tradition writ large, throughout. Just like, and you were just saying before how, like, when you've engaged with different strata of Jewish investigations into the primary content, which is Torah, you know, the 5 books of Moshe and the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, you know, that everything coming out of that has been quite a flow of processing that is almost in some ways infinite.
And you see it in like the main characters there. You see it not just throughout Tanakh, you see it throughout the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Rishonim, the Acharonim, all the generations basically. Rabbis, they really bring themselves into the tradition. They're not saying, here's this fixed thing, I'm going to engage with it. What did they say? Let me learn it and just kind of pass it on and get really good at understanding what they said. They really bring their immediate lives, their personality, their doubts, their joys, their struggles into the tradition. They make it super personal. And I think we need to remember that it's meant to be that way.
Yeah, super personal.
Super personal.
In a sense that I've been getting, studying for these last few years, like in a very intense way, has been that potentially the divinity of Torah isn't in the actual content as it manifests in the particular stories or in the contradictions between stories, but the divinity is in the capacity for the content to generate an infinity of understandings and interpretations. And when we like understand and can touch into those infinite permutations of meaning making, that touching into that infinity is divine.
It makes me think of David Cooper saying that God is a verb, not a noun.
God is a verb.
Right. Second, we make God into something fixed. I think we kind of lost connection to that higher reality, which is not. It's not the world of form. It's more the world of potentiality. The world that gives birth to form. The infinite. It's without boundaries.
Yeah, it's the world of form. Yeah.
It comes from before, that which gives birth to the fixed, to the relative.
And I believe that in identifying Torah as an infinite well of content and potential for interpretation, I don't have to put aside all of the associations or even the sort of critiques from modern scholarship about looking at stories in the Torah and being like, well, this was clearly influenced by this other older culture, and this looks like it was written at this time. To me, that doesn't take away from the potential divinity that I could locate within the actual content. You know, and because I take that stuff seriously. I do. Like as I studied history for my undergraduate degree, and I take historicity and scholarship and historiography and analysis, critical analysis, seriously. And I don't think that in doing so and accepting the discoveries and the theories laid out by modern scholarship, that I have to in any way compromise the experience, the divine experience I have being la'asok b'divrei Torah, to engage with words of Torah.
I love that.
Right? Like,
it's very threatening, honestly, I think for a lot of people, when they're really deeply in the tradition, for me, like I grew up, very in a very religious community, and I left that early on, but then when I reconnected years ago, encountering that scholarship, it was very threatening. It's like, oh, wait, was Devarim, Deuteronomy really compiled? I don't know, but I like what you're saying, that experientially you can encounter it in a way in which it doesn't even matter. Like, we're not going to really know ultimately, but yeah, that you can actually digest that information as scholars and not have it be.
Not only digest it, but I actually appreciate the voices of people who are scholars and who are at times showing up in spaces as like sort of atheistic voices, and they're saying like, well, how can you justify these contradictions and these inconsistencies and these historical correlates, which would show that actually there's nothing to say about the divine authorship. But I think it's less to me about divine authorship and more about divine readership. Like, that the divinity is in the engagement, not necessarily in the sourcing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. At least that's how I'm able to, for myself, continue a serious, deliberate, and consistent working with Torah and making it woven into my life, while also listening to the respected academic voices around me, and not blinding myself willfully to the work that they've done in order to uncover what we can know about sort of the different cultural, historical influences that have come to bear on the manifestation of the content as we have it when we pass it down. And that it also, like we were saying about not being a fixed product, but more of a process, that scholarship and that criticism actually feels like an aid to me in making sure I don't fall into the trap of making a fixed product of the content. Because as soon as I think this must be what it was really meant to be, I can find a scholar who says that actually Gilgamesh said that, or actually this ancient Near Eastern text or inscription said that. I'm like, oh, there I go again. I tried to make a fixation when really it's about just playing with what's available and trusting that the voice that I have to articulate how it's hitting me is going to be new in some way than whatever has come before, and that is holy. You know, Shiru Ladronai Shir Chadash. Like, you have to sing a new song, right? And singing, I think, has always been a really helpful modality for thinking about what we're actually doing, or what I'm actually doing when I'm learning Torah every day, is that I'm learning new notes. I'm taking old songs and I'm learning how to weave new scores for myself and for people that I wanna teach, in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I love you were talking about divine readership before. I never heard that.
I don't know.
You too. Okay. That just came. I love that. I love that. I love bringing that even beyond like Tanakh, bring that to everything. Yeah, bring it to Mishnah. I was learning, Pirkei Avot with some friends on Shabbat. Very, very challenged by some of it. And the idea of divine readership, going back to like it not just being a passive process, but it's also on you, right? To connect, to make it into something kadosh. And B, like it just gives us a lot more. It empowers us to be more in our critical thinking. For example, to look at Pirkei Avot and say, here is some really profound wisdom, and also here are some parts that maybe are semblances of a culture that was actually confused regarding sexism, for example, or whatever else. Divine readership. I think of that quality of divine readership is something very wise, and fearless, and it's not intimidated by imperfection. It's really looking for. It sees that in this world, in this reality, like there's going to be imperfection everywhere. There's going to be confusion, and we can still find the light. We can still find within the klipot, in the husks, we can find the or.
Yeah, I think something that I've been learning these past few weeks for myself is the holiness of the attempt, of like just making an attempt, whether it's with this channel or with going up for different jobs or just putting myself out there more, that there's something very holy in the confluence of all the forces that led up to a moment of deciding I'm going to make the attempt, and then the action itself. And that kind of also feels like when coming to Torah, there's everything that went into all the millennia of scholarship and thinking and meditating and creating and co-creating that went into the content as it appears to me in that moment, and then meeting me exactly where I am in that moment, and in that meeting point, that's holiness. The holy, like, I don't know if I could access holiness without the content, but I don't think the content would also contain holiness if I wasn't bringing myself to it. So it has to be in that meeting point, that kiss between those 2 points, or the kiss between the 2 different faces of the potential of divinity, or something like that. I don't know.
Fresh baked bread. It's not an old. It's not a recipe book that we hand down and we're like, oh, we just study the recipes because they're holy. You gotta take the recipe and you gotta get the ingredients from the farmer's market, from the grocery store, from your friends. Mix it up yourself, put it in the oven, take it out and eat it and taste the fresh hot bread every generation. And we're doing it a little differently.
Yeah. And right, I love that because sometimes I think about the difference between baking and cooking. I've once heard is the difference in music terms between classical music and jazz, right? That like cooking can be very improvisational. You have these different ingredients, but they can all be sort of brought together in very unique, almost random ways, just in the moment that you're cooking it, and then it makes something very jazzy. And then baking, it's like there are measurements, there are scientific, there are ways, but then if you're able to bring that focus and that intentionality to each step of the process of baking, what is produced is like quite delicious. Symmetrical. Yeah. So why did I bring that up? Because you were talking about baking, and because, yeah, in a way, I think the baking analogy helps me. I used to be a baker, actually. Like, at one of my gigs, I worked at a bread store, and we baked bread. And, you would get up early in the morning, and you would go and find the bags of wheat berries, and you'd pour them into the grinder to create the flour. And then it was a very involved process. But I think it's in that first step of taking the primary. When I'm thinking about Torah content, I'm thinking about the wheat berries, not necessarily already the flour, and that every time I would pour the berries into the grinder and it would produce this fine flour, I was recognizing that a transformation was happening. And I feel like each batch of bread in some ways felt different because of whatever elements were in the room or were going on with the berries at that time and what their consistency was. And it was hard to ever say that 2 batches of bread between 2 weeks were identical. They weren't. But I knew what they were, and I knew what they were trying to be, but I also recognized that there was something slightly different each time. And yeah, so I feel like with engaging with Torah content, also, it's going to be a little bit different each time, and that's okay.
It's going to be in relation to the environment.
To the environment. And I don't personally feel a sense of excitement or value in trying to resuscitate a form of Torah bread that was exactly what was being eaten in like the 1400s. I want the Torah bread of 2023. Like, I want to be a part of tasting and sharing.
I am curious though what that bread tastes like. I'm not saying I want to recreate it, but I am curious. I don't even know if we really do know exactly what bread they're eating. A lot of people think they know what their bread looks like, but yeah, at the same time.
Well, I think people in certain communities, my observation is, in an attempt to try to get closer to maybe what that kind of bread was, that they try to do a lot of environmental controls, right? Whereas in like a specific bakery, would be like, okay, we need to keep the temperature exactly as it would have been in this setting, in this part of, Israel or whatever, and it's got to be like this. And then in spiritual communities, it's like, we need to adhere to the strictures and to the forms of ritual living and community as precisely as it was, as we can tell, in that period, and create new generations of people within that context, and that will allow us to experience whatever potential magic was available to people that was so precious and that was so worth trying to protect and in some cases fight for. And we can't know that if we're just was what these communities might be thinking and feeling. There's no way we're going to know that if we just open up our bakery walls to all the disparate elements and environmental forces that just happen to be here now. It's going to be a totally different. Whereas I guess I want to embrace that. And I feel like, moving into the psychedelic piece, that one of my understandings of the impact of working with psychedelics on a neurological level is that sort of breaking down of those boundaried sections of meaning and identity, that sort of separates us from the outside of us, like the interoception, the proprioception, the keeping some things locked away, whereas some things are more accessible, and everything kind of gets interconnected and live wired and for a period of time in a new orientation. And in that experience, there's like actually, in my attempts to keep things so staid and so separated for the sake of what I felt was preserving me and keeping me safe and keeping me whole, I've been missing out on opportunities to consider what it would mean to allow totally different areas of my thinking and my experiencing to actually communicate and be connected to each other much more directly in novel ways. And does that make sense?
Yeah, you kind of, we tend to, I think one of the key things you said was like for safety, right? Recognize we keep that very boundaried reality that most of us live in day to day to protect ourselves. It could be threatening for many reasons. And when we have that experience of opening it up, all kinds of insights, all kinds of joy, like the pleasure of like daily kitchen sink life. It like mamish pops out. It's like, wow, it's like amazing to be a human, and I think that heals a lot of the things that we struggle with. Finding meaning, right? Like things become meaningful. I always have the thought that like meaning is not. Yes, it can come from an intellectual place. I'm doing this because it's meaningful, because it's symbolic, etc. Yes, but ultimately, I think meaning is in the moment. It doesn't come from connecting this moment to other moments. It's an experience in itself. Something. I'm watching Nagelwasser. This itself feels meaningful in itself, for itself. Sweeping the floor. I'm not just sweeping so it can be clear. It's meaningful.
Yes, I was just listening to Sam Harris talking to some YouTuber. I think his name is Chris Williamson, from a few weeks ago about just like a continuing to iterate and recapitulate his sort of rational form of mysticism that he espouses through the channels that he cultivates. And I think he really said very similar things, and sort of like, because he's such a proponent of mindfulness. But what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is attending with full attention, or as full attention as we can muster, to what is happening right now, and allowing that to infuse a sense of significance into life. That is actually the rainbow, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Which is accessed through attention and through, being fully immersed in whatever action you're doing. And I guess that's also a way of, I think that's why for me, a mitzvah, understood in the sort of the way that a lot of Hasidic masters understand it at savta, right, as like join, like the root of mitzvah isn't like sivui, command. That's one orientation, but a different orientation coming from the Aramaic, savta, is a mitzvah is a moment and an opportunity to join and to connect with the present moment. And there are many opportunities, because there's so many different forms of actions that can facilitate that mindful moment.